Most men will live their entire lives never understanding what women actually want. They'll buy the flowers, they'll send the long texts, they'll do everything society told them to do, and they'll still end up confused, broken and alone, wondering what went wrong. But 500 years ago, a man sat in exile, stripped of everything, and wrote down truths so dangerous that governments tried to burn his words. His name was Machiavelli, and what he discovered about human nature, especially female nature, wasn't pretty. It wasn't romantic, but it was real. And today, we're going to crack open that brutal, uncomfortable truth that most people are too afraid to say out loud. If you're not ready to have your entire worldview challenged, leave now. But if you want to finally understand the game you've been losing your whole life, stay, because after this, you will never see women or yourself the same way again. Before we get into this, let me be clear about something. This isn't about hating women. This isn't about disrespecting women. This is about understanding women. And there's a massive difference between the two. See, Machiavelli wasn't a bitter man ranting about the opposite sex. He was a political philosopher, a strategist, a man who studied power the way a surgeon studies anatomy. He didn't care about feelings. He cared about patterns. He observed courts, kingdoms, marriages, alliances. He watched powerful men get destroyed by the very women they loved. And he watched cunning men thrive because they understood one fundamental truth that most people refuse to accept. People don't respond to what you say. They respond to what you represent. And that single idea is the key to understanding everything we're about to discuss. Now, Machiavelli lived in Renaissance Italy, a world of backstabbing, political marriages, poisoned wine, and alliances held together by nothing but calculated self-interest. In that world, if you were naive, you didn't just lose your girlfriend, you lost your head, literally. So Machiavelli learned to see the world without the comfortable lies most people wrap themselves in. And when you strip away those lies, when you look at human nature with clinical precision, you start to see patterns that are as true today as they were in 1513. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Illusion of Nice. Here's the first thing Machiavelli would tell you if he were alive today. Being nice is not a strategy. It's a surrender. Now, before you get defensive, hear me out. There's nothing wrong with being kind. Kindness from a position of strength is one of music, the most attractive qualities a man can have. But that's not what most men do. Most men are nice because they're afraid. They're afraid of conflict, afraid of rejection, afraid that if they show who they really are, they'll be abandoned, so they smile when they want to argue. They agree when they want to disagree. They bend themselves into shapes they were never meant to take, all in the hopes that their compliance will be rewarded with love. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince that it is much safer to be feared than loved if one must choose between the two. Now most people read that and think he was talking about tyranny. He wasn't. He was talking about respect. He was observing a fundamental truth about human psychology. People take kindness for granted. They always have, they always will. But they never take strength for granted. Think about it. Think about the relationships you've seen in your own life. The men who bend over backwards, who sacrifice everything, who make their entire personality about pleasing their partner. What happens to them? They get walked on. Not because the woman is evil, but because nature has programmed human beings to test boundaries. And when those boundaries don't exist, respect evaporates. It's not a conscious choice. It's instinct. A woman doesn't sit down and think, he's too nice, I'm going to disrespect him now. It happens on a level much deeper than logic. When a man has no backbone, something inside her brain registers him as unsafe. Not physically unsafe, evolutionarily unsafe. Because for thousands of years, a man who couldn't hold his ground was a man who couldn't protect his family. And no amount of modern civilization has rewired that primal code. Machiavelli understood this. He saw it play out in the courts of Florence, Rome, and Milan. The rulers who tried to please everyone ended up pleasing no one. The rulers who stood firm, who had a vision, who were willing to make hard decisions, even when it made them unpopular. Those were the ones who commanded loyalty, not just from their subjects, from their wives. So here's the first brutal truth. Women don't want a nice man. They want a strong man who is capable of being nice. There's a world of difference between those two things. One is a choice, the other is a default. And women can sense the difference in seconds. Chapter 2, The Currency of Power. Now, let's talk about what Machiavelli identified as the real currency of attraction. And no, it's not money, it's not looks, it's not even confidence, at least not the way most people understand it. It's power, but not the kind of power you're thinking of. Machiavelli defined power not as dominance over others, but as dominance over yourself, the ability to control your emotions, the ability to walk away, the ability to sit in silence while the world around you screams for a reaction. That is power, and that is what women are fundamentally drawn to. Let me explain why. Machiavelli observed that fortune, which he described almost like a force of nature, favors the bold. He compared fortune to a river that floods, and said that the man who builds levees before the flood is the man who survives. Now translate that into relationships. The flood is emotional chaos. Drama tests uncertainty. Every relationship has them. And the man who remains unshaken during those floods. The man who doesn't crumble, who doesn't beg, who doesn't lose his identity because someone raised their voice at him. That is the man who earns genuine, lasting attraction. Here's what most dating advice won't tell you. Women test men. They do. It's not manipulation. It's not cruelty. It's biology. On a subconscious level, a woman needs to know that the man she's with can handle pressure. Because if he can't handle her emotions, how is he going to handle the world? If he falls apart over a disagreement, what happens when real adversity hits? These tests come in different forms. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's an argument over something small. Sometimes it's flirtation with someone else to see if you'll react. And here's the key. The test isn't about the content. It's about the response. If you react with panic, jealousy, or desperation, you fail. Not because your emotions are wrong, but because your reaction reveals a lack of internal stability. Machiavelli wrote that men judge by the eye rather than by the hand, because everyone can see but few can feel. What he meant was that perception matters more than reality. A man who appears unshakable is treated as unshakable regardless of what he actually feels inside. And this isn't about faking it. It's about training yourself to genuinely become the kind of man who doesn't crumble under pressure. Because when you do that, something remarkable happens. You stop needing validation. And the moment you stop needing validation from women is the moment they start freely giving it to you. That's the paradox Machiavelli identified centuries ago. The less you chase approval, the more it chases you. Chapter 3, the one thing women actually want. All right, we've talked about what doesn't work. We've talked about the currency of power. Now let's get to the core. The one thing Machiavelli philosophy reveals about what women truly want. And here it is, brace yourself. Women want a man with a mission. That's it, that's the brutal, simple, world-shaking truth. A man who has something in his life that matters more than her. Not because she wants to be neglected, not because she wants to feel unimportant, but because a man with a mission is a man with direction. He has gravity, he has purpose, and purpose is the single most attractive quality a human being can possess. Machiavelli dedicated his life to studying leaders, and the one pattern he found across every great leader, every man who commanded armies, built empires, and held the loyalty of thousands was singular focus. These men didn't sit around waiting for approval. They didn't build their lives around other people's expectations. They had a vision, and everything else, including love, orbited around that vision. Now, here's what happens when you don't have a mission. You make her your mission, and the moment you do that, you've already lost. Because no human being wants to be someone else's entire reason for living. It's too much pressure, it's suffocating, and most importantly, it's unattractive. When you make a woman the center of your universe, you're communicating something devastating. You're telling her that you had nothing going on before she showed up, that your life was empty, that you are incomplete without her. And nothing kills attraction faster than a man who is incomplete. Machiavelli wrote about how rulers who became dependent on allies rather than their own strength always met their downfall. The same applies here. A man who becomes emotionally dependent on a woman who structures his happiness around her mood, her attention, her approval, that man has handed over his power. And once you hand over your power, you never get it back gracefully. Compare that to the man who has a mission. He wakes up with purpose. He's building something. He's growing. He's moving toward a destination that excites him. When he spends time with a woman, it's because he chooses to, not because he has nothing else. That choice is what makes the time valuable. That choice is what makes her feel valued, because she knows she's not filling a void. She's joining something already great. This is the core of Machiavelli attraction. You don't attract what you chase. You attract what you build. Chapter 4. The danger of revealing everything. Here's another lesson from Machiavelli that most modern men desperately need to hear. Mystery is not a game. It is a survival mechanism. Machiavelli warned leaders never to reveal their full hand. He argued that a prince should appear merciful, faithful, humane, upright, and religious, but should be flexible enough to adapt when circumstances demand it. Now strip the politics out of that advice and look at it through the lens of relationships. Most men, when they like a woman, dump everything on the table immediately. Their feelings, their insecurities, their entire history, their plans for the future. They think vulnerability equals connection. And in some cases, deep into a relationship, it does, but in the early stages, revealing everything is suicide. Here's why. Human beings are wired to value what they have to work for. It's called the effort heuristic. The more effort you invest in understanding something, the more valuable it becomes to you. When you tell a woman everything about yourself in the first week, you've removed the discovery process. You've taken away the mystery that keeps her thinking about you at 2 a.m. You've essentially handed her the entire book and said, "Here, no need to read it." And what does she do with that book? She puts it on the shelf and forgets about it. Not because it wasn't good, but because there's no reason to pick it up again. She already knows the ending. Machiavelli understood that people are drawn to what they can't fully understand. The leaders who maintained an air of unpredictability were the ones who held power longest. Because when people can't predict you, they pay attention to you. And attention is the precursor to attraction. This doesn't mean you should lie. It doesn't mean you should be emotionally unavailable or cold. It means you should reveal yourself in layers like a great story. You give enough to create interest, but you always leave them wanting more. You share your depth gradually, so that every conversation feels like peeling back another layer of something fascinating. The men who do this naturally, the ones who don't over-explain themselves, who don't seek validation by sharing their feelings prematurely, those are the men women describe as magnetic. They can't quite explain what it is. They just know they want more. That's not manipulation. That's understanding human psychology. And Machiavelli was the master of it. Chapter 5, Why Women Choose Dangerous Men. Now we have to address the elephant in the room. Why do women so often choose men who seem bad for them? Men who are unreliable, emotionally unavailable, even destructive. This is the question that drives nice guys insane. And Machiavelli, without ever directly writing about dating, gave us the perfect answer. In The Prince, Machiavelli wrote that fortune is a woman, and to keep her under control, it is necessary to treat her roughly. Now, this quote has been taken out of context by half the internet. He wasn't advocating for cruelty. He was using the language of his time to make a philosophical point about boldness versus passivity. His argument was simple: fortune meaning luck. Opportunity and success favors those who act decisively. Those who hesitate, who play it safe, who wait for the perfect moment. They get steamrolled by circumstances. The man who moves boldly, even imperfectly, commands fate in a way the cautious man never will. Apply this to relationships. The dangerous man isn't attractive because he's dangerous. He's attractive because he's decisive. He doesn't ask for permission to live his life. He doesn't wait for a woman to tell him what to do. He moves with certainty, right or wrong. He moves, and that movement, that sheer momentum of a man who trusts himself enough to act, is intoxicating. The nice guy, by contrast, is always waiting. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for a signal, waiting for permission. And while he's waiting, the bold man has already walked over, introduced himself, and created a moment. Not because he's better, but because he's braver. Women don't want danger. They want a man who isn't afraid of it. They want a man who walks toward challenge instead of away from it. And when you look at the so-called bad boys through this lens, you realize they're not chosen because they're bad. They're chosen because they're unafraid. They project a confidence that says, "I can handle whatever comes." And in a world full of uncertainty, that kind of energy is like a lighthouse in a storm. The lesson from Machiavelli is clear. Stop being cautious, stop overthinking. Stop trying to calculate the perfect move. Act, move, decide, even if you're wrong. A wrong decision made with confidence is more attractive than no decision made out of fear. Chapter 6, The Art of Walking Away. This might be the most important chapter because this is where most men fail. And this is where Machiavelli wisdom cuts deepest. The ability to walk away is the ultimate power in any relationship, and most men simply do not have it. Machiavelli argued that a prince must never be so attached to an alliance that he cannot sever it when it no longer serves his interests. He wasn't talking about being disloyal. He was talking about self-preservation. He was talking about understanding that the moment you cannot walk away from something, you have become its prisoner. In relationships, this manifests in devastating ways. The man who cannot walk away will tolerate disrespect. He'll tolerate dishonesty. He'll tolerate being treated as an option while treating her as a priority. And every time he stays despite being mistreated, his value in her eyes drops, not because she's cruel, but because his inability to leave tells her that he has no other options. He is always watching, always learning, always guarding the citadel. The door to the cage is open. You have walked out. Don't walk back in just because you miss the company. Keep walking into the dark, into the deep. That is where the treasure is. If this opened your eyes, understand this is only what I can show publicly. There are videos I cannot upload for everyone. There are aspects of dark psychology that I simply cannot discuss publicly on YouTube without being censored or demonetized. The algorithm suppresses the most powerful information. Those exist behind the join button. If you're still here, you're not like the others. Subscribe if you haven't, but if you want what's hidden, click the join button and step into the architect level. You will unlock exclusive uncensored videos that dive into the deepest parts of the human psyche. Most won't, that's the point. Connect with new update comment below your thoughts.